Hello, slingers. Welcome back to another Wordslinger podcast. I'm glad you're here because I'm talking to somebody who I found him really interesting, really inspiring, and I think you will too. His name is Vance Monet. He's a poet, and we're going to get to it right after this.
It's the Wordslinger podcast, where story matters. Build your brand, write your book, redefine who you are. It's all about the story here. What's yours? Now, here's the guy who invented pants optional, Kevin Tomlinson, the Wordslinger.
Wordslinger.
This segment of the Wordslinger podcast is being brought to you by me. Now, if you'd like to support me and my work, this podcast, whatever else I'm doing, you can do that best by going and buying one of my books or a whole bunch of my books. Go to kevintomlinson.com/books, where you'll find an entire library of things waiting for you to discover. Go find your next new favorite read, and you'll be helping me out, which means I can continue to help you out. Well, I am Kevin Tomlinson, the Wordslinger. Thank you for tuning in to another Wordslinger podcast. I try to bring you guests for this show who are maybe people you wouldn't be exposed to otherwise. People who maybe you've never heard of, maybe they aren't in the same circles or the same space you're in. We're a very welcoming community as writers. And I've been aiming this show outside of that community quite a bit lately, but I know that most of you, I see you. I know you're coming in from the indie author space, and I welcome you. I love you, and I welcome you. But for those of you who aren't indie authors, I think that interviews like this are also equally beneficial to you, because what I do is try to talk to people who are, from every walk of life. Or every walk of life, I guess. Entrepreneurs and writers and creators of all kinds. There's a lot we can learn and a lot we can apply to our lives and our careers and our businesses. So I'm always happy to bring on new guests. And this guest, Vance Monet, was introduced to me by a friend. Her name is Kayla Friedrich. Hello, Kayla, if you're watching. And at first I wasn't sure if I should bring Vance on because he's not established really as a professional quote unquote writer. But the more I talked to him in this interview, the more I realized he's the perfect guest. He's a perfect guest for this show and for you to hear about and learn about. I'm not going to delay this too long because I do want to get into this, but talking about inversions metaphor, that's one of the principal topics we cover. It's a very interesting concept. I think that if you are a writer, there is something to learn from this that you can apply to prose as well as poetry. And I don't know if I've got any poets in the audience. I always tell people that I was never much into poetry, but kind of turns out that I'm much more into poetry than I thought, and even write poetry without realizing it. So we talk a little bit about that in the interview. But even if you're not a writer, this inversions metaphor thing is a good thing to apply to your daily life. As a way to sort of shift your perspective, learn something new about the experiences you're having. So I'm not going to delay this any longer. Let's get into this chat with Vance Monet, and I'll see you on the other side. Well, thank you for tuning in. I'm sure I did an excellent job in the intro. Yay me! Thank you, Kevin of the past or future. So I'm having a conversation with someone today that. This is an interesting one because normally what I have is people who come to me through, some connection in the some form of business. Usually, a PR agency reaches out with an author, or someone I know in the indie author space, or something like that. But today, I'm talking to Vance Monet, and we were introduced by a good friend of mine who's been a great help to me in editing and getting my books ready. And I owe her a book, Vance. I owe her the current book. I'm going to get it to her soon. But talking about Vance Monet, you're a poet. You're all kinds of things, really. But I mean, poetry that's what we're zeroing in on right now. But welcome to the show, Vance. Thanks for being a part of it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
We got to say, we have to do our shout out to Kayla because she did set this up. So, hello, Kayla.
Hey, Kayla.
How did the two of you know each other?
We met at the library in which we work,
Okay.
and actually, I met her before I started working there. She recommended a book to me because I was looking for Gothic fiction, and she told me about A Picture of Dorian Gray. And so that's when I first met her. And then when we started working together, I was able to formally introduce myself. So it was a
Excellent.
nice meeting. Hmm.
Excellent. Picture of Dorian Gray is one of my favorite pieces of classic literature. Um, I read it, I don't know, in my 20s, I think. Uh,
Oh, wow.
yeah, so which is forever ago for you because that was like 30 something years ago. So you may not have even been
Uh,
alive at that point. I don't even know how old you are. I'm guessing like
I,
20 something.
no, you would have to add maybe 10 more years to that.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, then you were alive at least. Perhaps in diapers,
Yeah,
which does not
a
make me
little
feel any
man.
better. So, I have to tell you, so I was looking at now I've been on your website. We're going to share a link to that for people to find you. Um, vancemonet.my.canva.site. So that's a long URL, but that's we'll
Mhm,
put it in the show notes for people. But I was looking at some of the poetry on your site, and this is the thing that struck me. And we were having a conversation before this call, and I do want to loop back to that. So do not let me off the hook for
mhm.
that.
Okay.
Um, but this was interesting to me because it's 49ers news in poetry. And it reads as when I click on it and I'm scrolling through, you got a whole bunch of samples here. And I love it because it's like it's kind of like headlines like you might see for like news stories about the 49ers, but it's all in this poetry format. What's this? Where'd that come from, Vance?
Okay. So I think there's a 49ers photographer, uh Zagaius or something like that. He's always been the 49ers photographer since Bill Walsh was the coach. And you see his pictures on NFL films and you're saying to yourself, well, maybe I could be the 49ers poet. I don't necessarily need to be the 49ers photographer, but I could be the 49ers poet. And every time they have to talk about the poetic aspect of the 49ers, they call upon me and I just write something for them. So I thought about the news and I said, well, I've been to Sweden. I know that they have a simplified news page. I think in 6 lines or 6 pages, that's what they call it. And I said I could do something similar, but just with 49ers news that's simplified and just write it in tanka, a Japanese form, similar to haiku, and make it accessible to everyone where it's just simple poetry that people can read and enjoy 49ers news.
That's That's so great, man. Okay, so Tonka is not one I'm familiar with. So you've introduced a term to me now, and I'm going to have to
Hmm.
deep dive into that now. Um, why the 49ers? What was it?
The
That's your home
49ers,
team, right?
that's my home team. I was born in San Francisco. So considering that I live in Texas right now, I should have been the Texans, but that's
No,
another story. So, yeah, I picked the 49ers because I said I need something I'm passionate about
man.
in life. I know we talked about this earlier, but your dreams, what you really are moved by. And I said, I'm moved by the 49ers. If I had to think, sleep, eat, or do something, it would be the 49ers. I watched every game during season. I had their heartbreaking Super Bowl loss this year. So I pay attention to the 49ers all the time. And I thought it would just be great to keep track of them throughout the year and just write some poetry. So that's what I thought about.
Yeah, that's very that's very interesting. I mean, it's not something you're doing as a kind of commercial exercise. You're just this is a passion, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I'm so accustomed to like, I'm a writer and I know so many writers, hundreds of thousands of writers at this point, and almost uniformly we're all thinking about how to earn a living with our words. Is that something you are interested in? And do you see this leading to that, or is this just not even a concern of yours?
Not as much as spreading the word of poetry.
Yeah.
Um, accessing the ears and eyes of people. I think that's what I'm interested in. And one of the things I'm trying to do actually right now is work with a painter that I just met at a Down syndrome awareness festival.
Hmm.
And he is an excellent artist. And I started to pair up my poetry with what he did. And I said, this is something that I could spread not only for myself in the sense of poetry, but also his artwork. So I'm just pushing awareness, pushing accessibility to things that people might not know about, and putting it in a way that it's beautiful so that people are encouraged and inspired.
Yeah. That is yeah. I mean, that what it comes back to is, we were having this discussion just for the call that, if I
Hmm.
were, I spent a lot of my career writing for free.
Hmm.
And that whole adage of, you'll know what you love if you're willing to do it for free. Words were always my paintbrush. And that sounds like
Mm.
the same sort of thing you're talking about, right? Like you're
Yeah.
reaching hearts. Yeah.
Hmm.
That's fascinating. So, uh, looking over the rest of your site, so what you do other work, and I'm not able to look at it at the moment, but you write sonnets and things like that. That's
Hmm.
so. What is that also 49ers centric?
It's more love centric. I write
Okay.
love poetry with the sonnets.
Yeah.
So I've written a lot of love poems recently in the sonnet form. Before I started writing love poems, I just wrote about life. It could be about birds, it could be about something I experienced. My high school track coach was also my English teacher, so he pushed that on me. He said, "Stop writing epic poetry, write sonnets," because that was the other thing I used to write. And so
Nothing
that's
wrong
why
with epic poetry, though.
I,
You still do
yeah.
that every now and then?
Yeah, I'm working on the poem that includes the style that I represented to you earlier. So when we
Okay.
talk about that, I'll talk about the epic poem that I'm working on.
Well, let's not waste any time. Let's get to it.
Okay.
What is the style? Tell me about the style.
Okay, so I call it inversions metaphor. It's really a music term inversion that I learned from my harp teacher because I play the harp. And inversion in music is when you take a chord and you switch the notes around. And by doing so, you can have something beautiful that relates to what it previously was. And so, what I decided to do with poetry was compare different ideas that could be physical, mental, emotional, whatever it is, that seem the same if you think about it. And then once you put them together, like a flower, a sun, and a cloud, you can say different things by reversing the order. So you might have a flower that shines while beclouded,
Okay.
or you have, let's say, that blooms, a sun blooming in a puffy formation. So the simple way of doing it is having three words side by side. So you would say blooming sun, or a sun blooms puffily. And if you switch it around, you would have flower sunnily the clouds.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
that way you're switching these things around so that you have the similarity and you are stretching the imagination so that a person can see that one thing's acting like another in a formation of three different concepts. And the way to describe it is that when you have a poem that has epic poetry, a story that's being told, you are able to obscure the exact wording of what you're saying. by using ideas that are similar but are in specific, not specific. So for instance, if I were to say, um, from one of my poems that I wrote when I was a kid, beautiful and entrancing, 'tis I, lovely child, come into me in the quiet eye of the wild. If I said something like that, instead of saying beautiful and entrancing, I could say something like beauty, sunlight. And you wouldn't know that the entrancing is really the sunlight because it's obscured by using the word sunlight. So the goal is to use words that don't tell you exactly what's happening. So it's almost like impressionism with poetry. You're
Okay.
just giving an impression of what's happening, and the beauty is lending itself to a general understanding. But once you get into it, you're able to understand that there is specificity to it. So one of the lines that I have in my poem goes like this: saluted, tooted, laissez. And so laissez is a character, he's a prince, and he's not only a knight, but he's a bird. So as a person and also a bird, he's able to do both actions at the same time. So the salute is an action he's doing as he's hailing somebody. But the toot is what a bird would do if a bird were a knight. It's the same way of vocalizing a greeting. So it's saluted, tooted, laissez. And then the next line goes like, night of love, referring to another person, reflect, defend, joust tide's unrequited flow. And in this case, the night of love is a declension. So each of the nights have their own declension. So as I said, you have three concepts and you're putting them all together. You have a night, a bird, and a declension. And as said in Latin, a declension is a group of nouns that are similar in meaning. So this woman is a night of love. So she has everything having to do with love. So as she is reflect defending, she is also repelling unrequited love. And unrequited is reflection of her because she's not returning the attacks of these soldiers that are training her. So they're saying that the attack is unrequited in her form, which is love, because unrequited love is love that's unreturned. So when we talk about her, we're saying her attacks are coming as unrequited because she's not returning these blows. So in a sense, we're using different words to reflect the identity of a person, and we have maybe 10 or 20 or 30 different words that can reflect love, like amorous or devotion or caring. And then for knight, it could be soldier, it could be salute, it could be warrior. Or for the idea of it being a bird, you have the word toot. You have also the word wing, or you can have the word sing. And you put all of them together and just switch them up interchangeably. And sort of like the book, The Tale of Genji, where you don't know who's talking to whom in classical Japanese. In this case, you only know who's talking to whom by the way in which they're referred. So the Night of Love, unrequited. You know whom you're talking about because it's referring to words having to do with love.
It sounds very I don't want to say complicated because that's not quite what I mean. It sounds
Hmm.
more like complex might be a better word. It
Hmm.
sounds complex but nuanced, I think.
Hmm.
Is that kind of the gist of because
Yeah.
my brain is inverting trying to follow the way that you're breaking it down, but I it sounds very like I don't know. It sounds like a dance. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah,
Sounds like,
exactly.
yeah,
I like to dance, so and I guess I picked up on that. You're looking at one thing, and then you have to switch and look at something else. Or
yeah,
like a swing out and swing dance, you're taking turns in the different positions across from each other.
yeah,
And in the middle, as you're making the transition, there's another word that connects the two. And so the important part is that it's beautiful in the exchange when you're changing the places and you're trying to interact with different things. That's the most important word, the interaction
yeah,
between different words.
yeah. That's well, it's in itself, that's a beautiful description of the whole thing. And there's
Hmm.
a poet. I I'm going to confess to you, Vance, that
Hmm.
I have never been much of a poet or a devotee of poetry, and I can't explain why, because I'm learning now in my 50s just how much I love the interplay of language
Mm.
at that level. And there's a poet that I discovered within the past year who's become my favorite poet, which isn't saying much because I don't
Mm.
have any other favorite poets. But he goes by the sort of the pen name alias of Atticus. Are you familiar
Oh,
with Atticus?
yes, I have this book.
Okay. Yeah. I've got like a small growing stack of Atticus
Mm.
poetry books, which is an astounding development in the life of Kevin
Hmm.
Tomlinson, because that just was not my thing. But that's one of the things that I love about his work is that in reading his poetry, the language of it hits me as home. You know,
Hmm.
it's the same way I handle language in prose, but you
Mm.
know, it's in this short form. And I feel like that's a
Hmm.
lot like what you're describing in a way. Like there's
Hmm.
the way that you're kind of playing with language in this stuff and
Hmm.
the way that you're, I'm never going to be able to say it. The way you're inverting, we'll
Hmm.
use your term, the way you're
Yeah.
inverting that sort of thing. Where did this come from? Clearly, you've studied something. Are you?
Yeah. So the truth is, I was dealing with some mental health issues for a while, and I decided to take some time out to just stream. I was streaming on Twitch, and I spent like 8 hours a day just writing poetry.
Wow.
And when I was doing that, I got to a point where I said, you know what? There's something that I want to investigate. It's called the spinning pumpkin. And so I said, if you could imagine a pumpkin spinning, how would it actually look? How would you describe that? And so I said, okay, there's a spinning pumpkin. It's going round and round and round. It was a random idea, but I'm one of those people that says if you can take something random and make sense of it, it probably is going to turn into gold.
Yeah.
So I looked at it and I said, well, it has the serrations, it has the orange color, it has the the size, it's round. And I said, well, if you made a comparison, you could say it obviously looks like a sun, but that doesn't take into account all the elements of the spinning pumpkin because it's spinning. And it's also something that looks like it has lines and has that little top at the top, that little head at the top of the stem. So I said, well, what could I do in order to accurately portray this? So I said, if I didn't have to compare parts with parts, but compared a whole with a whole, maybe I could describe the spinning pumpkin. So as a whole, it consists of parts, but I want to talk about them all together as opposed to just one thing at a time. Not just this orange color and calling it a sun, or maybe the fact that it looks like it could burn and calling it a stove. I said, I need something that has all of these elements, the motion, everything else at the same time. So I looked on YouTube because I knew that metal rods were things that seemed as if they could be heated and they would burn and look really fiery orange.
Yeah.
So I looked at something that was called a hot spinning machine, and it looked just like, for me, a spinning pumpkin because it was hot, it was burning orange, and it would move in a way that you could see it spinning. And I said, that's exactly what I'm talking about. But the greatness of the concept was that not only could you have something that looks like it, but it extends the meaning. So if you have a pumpkin, it's not a pumpkin now, it's like a factory.
Okay.
So that's the beauty of it, is that you're able to say that the pumpkin is a factory and you're able to make the pumpkin do things it normally doesn't do. And I thought that was fascinating because when you have a pumpkin that's pumping out metal and other things, you think to yourself, well, the pumpkin is able to transcend its pumpkinhood and it's able to be something that it looks like and creates. It's a creator now. And if you extend that to everything in life where things are taking on new meanings because they originally were one thing, but when you compare it to something else, you can see it in that light, then everything is starting to act in a different way, which means that things are not what you expect them to be. And they're beautiful because they can do more than what they usually do.
That is, again, brain melting. So thank you for that. I'm just, it's a fascinating exercise because what
Mhm,
you're doing is taking, this is something I do personally in my life with everyday objects.
mhm,
And like I have an exercise I've done for years. I learned it way back in high school in I
mhm,
believe the very town that you're in. We won't mention the town you're in because I don't want
mhm.
anybody stalking you there. But way back in high school, I had a physics professor or a physics teacher who said, he had this box of items and he'd take an item out and like a brick, and he had us do this exercise like, all right, for the next 5 minutes, you're going to write down every single thing you could think to do with this brick. And
Mm.
we did that exercise, man, and I burned that up. I mean, for some reason that exercise gelled with me, and I think I had 40 or 50 things on this list, and everyone else had like three. And
Wow.
so that was a fascinating exercise for me. But it feels to me like that's a kind of there's a
Yes.
similar vein there in what you're doing,
Yes.
and but you're kind of taking this to a metaphorical level.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So what I would have done with what you did is take three, four of those concepts and relate them to each other.
yeah,
And then from that pairing, you're able to say that this is a conglomerate and all these things have a purpose in each other.
okay, yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah. So it's great that you were mentioning that because that's the first step in doing what I'm doing, which is to look at what does it do or what can it do. And then once you have all these ideas, you find the best that relate to each other and make a team. And then you say, go team, go team, go team. And then
yeah.
you just watch it work in words.
That's really interesting. Do you I don't know, do you teach this to people somewhere
Well, I
somehow?
have taught it on Twitch. I'm trying to teach a poetry class locally,
Yeah.
and I haven't gotten the chance to talk about it because I only had one poetry class, which I taught Japanese literature for. Um, but it is something I want to teach because I think people would be really interested in it.
Yeah.
And I think it could expand their horizons as far as knowing what words can do. So I'm very excited about it. I just have to talk to the sponsors of the program and ask them if we can do a class on this and when we'll be able to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. You owe the world that, man. I think.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you.
or actually no, let me rephrase that. The world needs that. You don't owe
Yeah.
anybody anything, man. But I'm a big fan. So I love language. It's just it's just my tool. I think actually
Mhm.
that's probably a more accurate way for me to describe myself than I love words. It's it because I write, but I also do this stuff. I do like the
Mhm.
podcast and things. I'm very good at this too, and it's
Mhm.
all about the rhythm and the flow and the meter of language. And you're
Mm.
definitely you're nailing something there. That is
Thank you.
really hitting home with me. What do you? What's your I don't know. I hate to even go in this direction because I think you've got sort of this organically evolving thing going, but like, do you have sort of
Mhm.
a direction in mind for where you're going
Yes.
with this?
Well, the epic poem I want to illustrate and publish on Kindle, and I already have an artist in mind, a local
Okay.
artist, and she already agreed to do the work once I finish the poem.
Yeah.
So right now I'm changing what I'm doing with that inversions metaphor a little bit. I'm doing some research, which is what I did in the beginning. I just didn't pay for it. But right now I'm paying for National Geographic and Britannica, and
Yeah.
I'm writing inverted metaphors using the research on National Geographic or on Britannica. So if I'm reading an article about, let's say, dinosaurs, I'll write a poem about that and add it to the epic poem, or a stanza and add it to the epic poem. And then if I'm doing something with, let's say, controlled burning, or I don't know what it's called, it's like controlled fire.
Yeah.
It's when you burn something on purpose in order to increase vegetation or change the
Yeah.
ecosystem. So I would write about that. But the ultimate goal is to get back to what I was doing, which was to write the poem about the story, which is a prince that lives in the land of clouds and a girl that is whisked away in a dream to that world. And that is a poem that I want to finish, get illustrated. So my goal is to reach people and to
Yeah.
let them know that this exists. So publish my works, teach it for free wherever I can. I tutor as well. So one of the students I have, I'm teaching him poetry. So that's one of the things I'll probably run into with him. And I guess ultimately it's just publish, teach, and continue to experiment and spread also, I guess, the information that I'm getting from paid researchers, because they're the ones that are bringing a lot of the information that we get right now to people. And if we are able to put in a message that, oh, well, bees are going to be extinct, or that there are issues with the Everglades. Um, in that case, we're able to talk about real life in poetry and be advocates for the people that might not have a basis for their advocacy.
That's excellent. Well,
Thank you.
we're running out of time, which is unfortunate
Mhm.
because I am very much enjoying this conversation. But we're gonna have to thank Kayla again for
Yeah,
introducing us. But
absolutely.
what would be an end goal for you here? Or like, normally at this point of the show, what I say is, well, where can people find you and your work online? But
Yeah.
you can talk about that, but
Mhm.
what would be a good call to action for you? What would you want people to do as a result of this interview?
I would want them to look into inversions metaphor and start thinking about how they see life instead of looking at parts and parts.
Yeah.
Holes and holes. That's what I would like people to do instead of saying, okay, well, I have an alligator, looks just like a tree leaf because he's green.
Right.
I'd rather it be like, I have an alligator. Um, did you see that constellation in the sky? That's what that alligator just looks like. He's a constellation now.
Yeah.
So that's what I would like people to do.
All right. We will ask of them that, and I'm sure a lot will respond. And then if they want to reach out to you, find you online, we gave the website earlier, but I'll put it
Yes.
in the show notes.
Hmm.
Uh, well, Vance, this has been a great conversation, man. I appreciate it,
Thank you.
and
Oh, yeah.
I wish you the very best with what you're doing with that work. It sounds like
Thank you.
you got a very Zen vibe going on, man. So I support that. So
Thank
world
you.
needs more of that. All right. Well,
Thank you.
everybody, thank you for tuning into this interview. Stick around. I am sure to say something really interesting after this. So stick around for that. And otherwise, we'll see you on the other side. Well, I hope you enjoyed that chat with Vance. I know I did. I love talking to people that it's just obvious what a gentle soul they are. Vance is clearly a very gentle soul. He's got that, that sort of artist temperament that I encounter from time to time. I love encountering people like this because there's just something to learn from that. There's a light there that we can use to kind of see our own path. But inversions metaphor is an interesting topic and something that I want to explore deeper. I'm watching his work. I think there's going to be something that we can use in that in our own lives, not just our work, but just daily life. So hope you got a kick out of that. I've got links to all things Vance in the show notes, so make sure you check that out. Now I want to dive in because I've got I love it when people do this because this is something I really wanted to be part of the show. And ask Kevin anything. And this one's coming from my friend Wayne Burnup, who is a lovely man who has helped me a lot with a lot of the books. He's helped with editing and finding typos and other gaffes in my writing. So thank you for that, Wayne. Always happy to have you around. And Wayne asks, and you're going to see it pop up right now. Okay, so in my life, I try to ask God, what do you want me to learn from this situation? What about you? And that is, Wayne, exactly what I try to do with everything that comes up. Sometimes there's things that come up in my life that I really struggle to figure out, like what's the point of this? Why am I going through this? And I think part of the point of the things that we struggle with in life is to get us to ask the question, like, what is there for me to learn from this? Now, Wayne and I are we both love Christ. We're both Christ-like people, following God and the Holy Bible and that sort of thing. That may not be your thing. I get that, but that question is still vital and important. It's still one that you should ask yourself whenever anything comes up in your life. Whenever anything good or bad comes up in your life. One of the things I'm working on right now as I study and read and try to grow as a human being is letting go of judgment. I read something interesting today from Wayne Dyer that, it's impossible to let go of judgment because just anything you do involves judgment. I mean, any choice you make involves a judgment on your part. So that's not the right quest. The quest would be more akin to, and I'm learning, so forgive me, I may change my mind on this later, but the quest is really more akin to how do I let go of negative judgments? Like, how do I stop seeing things as bad? Because what happens is we tend to look at life and say, I like that and I don't like that. And so if I don't like that, it must be wrong. If I don't like that, then it doesn't belong in my life. And maybe that's true. Maybe it doesn't belong in your life. But I guess the idea is that if we're putting a negative judgment on something like that, then we are giving a slice of control over us. Like we're giving some of our attention to it. and I'd rather just turn away from it. And I think that's what the point is. I'm right now, I've had some struggles lately. Yesterday was not a great day for me. There's been days like that lately. And what I've noticed is what's happening for me is I start to focus on what I don't have, or what isn't happening, or what's not happening fast enough. And that's a judgment that is dictating my experience. It's dictating how I feel about myself, about my life. I feel down on myself. And so now I'm judging myself. I feel guilty. I was talking to Kara. We have these conversations while standing in our kitchen during our lunch breaks, because we both work from home full time. So we had a conversation in which I was saying, I'm sort of in that damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario where if I'm working and I'm working on something really hard, I feel guilty for things that I'm not working on, or for that I'm not taking time to replenish myself, sharpen the saw, or whatever. Then when I take the time to do those things that are supposed to nourish me, I'm going to read a book, or I'm just going to play a game and relax, or I'm going to do something like that, I feel guilty that I'm not doing the work. So I get it coming and going. So it's a continuous cycle of guilt. It's like a spectrum of guilt, but guilt's on both ends. That's me, though. That's me putting that judgment on my work and on my downtime and on my life. I'm seeing it as Kara put it, like a black and white scenario. It's like something's either good or bad, but there's no gray area. There's no in between for me. These are things I'm working on. So you may be working on it too. That's why I'm doing this show. I don't know how long I'll do this show. I mean, not to scare you or anything, but I love what I'm producing here. I don't get a lot of feedback, but I have this notion right now that the things I do that I don't get feedback on as much as I might like, or don't get the kind of response I might like. In reality, it's sort of like, what is my why for this? Like, why am I doing this? And I have this thought that, like, if I don't do this, if I don't say the things that I feel compelled to say, if I don't write what I think I should write, or produce the show I think I should produce, there's no chance that someone will see it and be influenced by it. Like, if I produce it and no one sees it, I mean, there was at least still that chance that you encountered it and you were moved by it and inspired by it. I think that's a good way for all of us to think about our lives. Figure out, like, I don't want to be the reason that one person didn't get that bit of inspiration they needed, or that bit of encouragement they needed that made all the difference in their life. I want to make sure that I give them plenty of opportunities to come across that. Now, that said, sometimes things come to an end. And, Wordslinger podcast for me for a while came to an end. There was a 4-year gap in there where I didn't produce any episodes because I was burnt out. And so there is that to consider. Like, if all you ever do is give and you don't get anything back, then it's not that the effort of giving is wrong. It's that continuing to give may be wrong. And so you might have to dial back, and you might have to decide, I gave, and it's out there. Hopefully it continues to exist out there. And now it's time to move on. So sometimes that happens. I'm not saying that's happening right now. I've still got some interviews and things recorded, and I've still got episodes in me, but you never know. I've got an idea for a different show that I may produce, maybe in alongside Wordslinger, maybe someday instead of Wordslinger, maybe something else entirely. I don't know. Why am I saying all this? It's because I want you to know that the reason I'm here, the reason I show up and do this show every week right now is because I think what I'm producing may reach one of you, or maybe several of you, and improve your life. So, that said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. I appreciate you being here on the show. If you're catching this in audio, do me a favor, because I've moved the show from my personal channel to its own YouTube channel, and that may cost me, but I'm committed to it. So if you are watching this right now, you found me. Thank you, and hopefully I managed to get everybody who was following me on YouTube on my personal channel to see this. But otherwise, if you're just discovering this for the first time, make sure you share it. So yeah, do all those things. Like, share, subscribe, and hit the little bell, for notifications. I don't know how many people do that, but it's there. It helps me. Leave a comment on this video if you're on YouTube. And if you're listening to this on an audio podcast, thank you for tuning in and supporting me. And let me know what you think. Pop on over. Say hello wherever you find me on kevintumlinson.com, my website, and that's it. No more rambling, no more meandering. We're going to go ahead and wrap up. So thank you, and I will see you all next time.
Wordslinger.